Okay, go ahead and turn to Matthew 17. And we're going to look at the Transfiguration. Make sure. Sounds good. All right. All right, the Transfiguration from Matthew, his perspective. And we're not going to preach all of the verses tonight. 1 through verse 13 is the entire thing, the entire section of verses. But we're just going to look at the Transfiguration, look at it from Matthew's perspective, and why it's really important and what's going on here, everything that's mentioned. So Matthew 17, verse 1 through 13 is what we'll read all of tonight, and then we'll look at verses 1 through 8. The Bible says, and after 6 days, Jesus taketh... Oh, let me get the verses pulled up here. Let me do this. There we go. Let me pull it up right here. Matthew, so we can at least have the Bible also on. All right. Verse 1, and after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, his brother, and bringeth them up into an high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias, talking with him. Now remember, we mentioned this last week, that Moses and Elias, this is Moses and Elijah, then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elias. Now, if you remember last week, Mark tells us that he said this because he didn't really know what to say. He just said, hey, let's just build 3 tabernacles, okay, in their tents. Here, Matthew doesn't mention that, but he does mention the phrase, if thou wilt, which is very interesting. It's almost as though he's asking permission. You know, if this is good, we'll do this, right? Verse 5, and while he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, hear ye him. That's different. In whom I am well pleased, Mark doesn't mention. Verse 6, and when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. This is not mentioned. And Jesus came and touched them and said, arise and be not afraid. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no man save or except Jesus only. Verse 9, and as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying, tell the vision to no man, until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. Mark's gospel says they questioned what that meant. Matthew doesn't mention it. Verse 10, and his disciples asked him, saying, why then say the scribes that Elias or Elijah must first come? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Elias truly shall first come and restore all things. But I say unto you that Elias is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him, desired. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist. And that's new as well. That's not mentioned in Mark. We're not going to look at those last few verses tonight. They're important, but we're not going to have time to do that. I don't want to try to jam all of that in, okay? Because I really want to look at the verses here of the Transfiguration, okay? Now, we looked at Mark. Mark is focused on the development of the disciples, their growth, okay? That's what Mark seems to be focusing on. And Peter, who is telling Mark what to write, makes the connection himself in the book of 2 Peter, chapter number 1. Okay. Matthew, though, is dealing with everything from a different perspective. Matthew is writing from the perspective of Jesus being the king. Now, Mark focuses on the development, the growth of the disciples. They went from a stage of unbelief all the way to now they believe, they see Jesus for who he is, and the Lord is transfigured before them, and a lot of good things along with that. Matthew, he is, again, really focusing on Jesus as the King, the Messiah. And so I know we have the handout on this. So and as far as breaking the verses down, I have a bit of an outline for those that are here, and I'll give the outline. I'm not going to give it on PowerPoint on the video, but verse 1, the context of the Transfiguration. I want to just kind of give the outline as we're talking through this, okay? Because when I say the context of the Transfiguration, why is Jesus transfigured? Why did he change? What is going on before? What is happening after? And so it's important to remember the purpose of Matthew. So Matthew is writing this wonderful narrative. I mean, it's a great picture here. Great. I don't use the word story because when we use the word story, it's like something that didn't really happen. It's make believe, right? But he's giving us a wonderful perspective of Jesus, who is the Son of Man, who is the Christ, the Son of the living God. This is a wonderful thing. Now, Matthew is revealing to us Jesus' mission, his ministry, even his reign, the fact that he's going to be king. But what does Matthew show us? He shows us this in three distinct stages. Okay. Now, these three stages, I'm trying to be very purposeful in even how I say this, because I want to make sure I'm using every word, saying it clearly. And this is one reason why the Jews had a hard time accepting Jesus. Because these three distinct stages, we're looking back and saying, oh, look how plain this is. I mean, this is so clear. Okay. It wasn't that clear to the Jewish people because it wasn't. Okay, if you're going to count to 5, you don't count 1, 6, 3, 8, 9, 5. No. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right. So when God gave prophecy in the Old Testament, he didn't give prophecy like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? He gave different prophecies to different men at different times, showing them different things. And so sometimes it was very difficult. Listen, okay, for them to put it together. You say, well, Brother Dan, why would do we know when Jesus is going to come back? No. We've got 15 or 20 different views of when, how, and where Jesus is going to come back. And we got it's pretty laid out, I think, pretty clearly in the New Testament, yet we have a hard time putting that together. And the reason I'm saying all of that is Matthew is giving it to us 1, 2, 3 right here. Because it played out 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to show you what I mean here, okay? Now, so if you look in chapter 17 and verse 1, we have the context of the transfiguration. That's what he's talking about. Jesus is transforming. That's what the word transfigure. His figure was transformed. Okay? Transfiguration. All right, he was transformed. In verse 1, Matthew talks about the place. And after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, his brother, and bringeth them up into a high mountain. Now, we don't know what mountain this is. Okay? But it is believed by most with great assurance this is Mount Hermon. Now, I know we've talked about Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon to the Jewish people was very important. It's the highest place in Israel, okay? It was seen to be a great place of blessing by God. It was seen to be not necessarily the throne of God or anything like that, but it was not worshiped, but it was seen with great prominence. Now, Matthew tells us in chapter 16 that they are in Caesarea Philippi in verse 13. Now, we know from Matthew 17:1, they're here for at least 6 days. Luke tells us they're there for 8 days, and then after 8 days, they go into a high mountain, and he's transfigured there, according to Luke. So anywhere between 6 to 8, no more than 8, no less than 6, and we'll talk about that when we get over into Luke to show you the differences. Now, but if they're hanging out in the area of Caesarea Philippi, which I believe that they are, they go to this high mountain. I believe that it is Mount Hermon. Again, this is important. And again, why is this important? Because of what Jesus says in Matthew 16:18 about building His church, His assembly, on the rock where the gates of hell were. The gates of hell was a real place in Caesarea Philippi, and Mount Hermon, which is a high mountain, is located in this region. So I really believe that what Christ is doing here, He has already declared, I'm going to build my church, I'm going to build my called out assembly upon this rock, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And I believe that what we have with the Transfiguration happening on this mountain, I believe this, in the area of the gates of hell, is that Jesus is showing these disciples what He means and what He intends to do. Okay? And so the place that Matthew is bringing us into, this connection, this context, is that it's all related. Now, this is the point. This is the process of Matthew. Okay? This is the 1, 2, 3. The 1, 2, 3 is seen in the Old Testament, but the dots were not always connected. I know you probably remember doing the connect the dots when you were kids or growing up or whatever to help you learn numbers, counting, order, drawing, coloring, and all of that. Okay, so the dots were not always easily connected in the Old Testament. Okay, and that's fine. They're connected now for us to see, and that's what is happening. Now, what is the process of Matthew? The process of Matthew is the process of Jesus. Now, okay, so what is the process? I'm going to give it to you just over. I'm going to spit it out, and then I'm going to show it to you from Matthew, because this is why the Transfiguration is so important in Matthew. So here's the process of Jesus. What is it? Jesus has to first come to the earth. When He comes to the earth, He dies on the cross. When He dies on the cross, He resurrects. And He's eventually going to come back to the earth. Okay? That's the 3-stage process of Jesus. He comes, He's crucified, and then His kingdom is here. Okay? Now, that is exactly the order that we see in Matthew chapter 16. So this is the process of Matthew. So turn back to Matthew 16. I want to walk you through this because this is the context of the Transfiguration. This is why everything that Matthew records in Matthew 17, even the different things and the similarities, all fits into this. So in Matthew 16, in verse 13, Jesus asks the question, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" They answer Him. We come to verse 15. But He says to them, "But whom say ye that I am?" So He asks His disciples, "Who do you think that I am?" Peter answers, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." This is the first stage. This is the first step in the process of Jesus coming. And what is that? The acknowledgement of Jesus Christ. Jesus is first and foremost. He must be acknowledged. Now, He has already been acknowledged by the angels. He's been acknowledged by the 3 wise men. We know there were more, but the 3 wise men. He was acknowledged by John the Baptist. He's even acknowledged by Satan in Matthew 4 when he is tempted by the devil. You said, "Brother Daniel, what's the point?" This is the first step. This is the coming of Jesus. His acknowledgement. Remember what I said the second stage is He dies and he is crucified, He comes back to life. Okay, so keep reading. Now look at we have verse number 18 and verse number 19. Here is the second stage. "And I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, and I will give unto thee verse number 21. Excuse me, verse 21. 18 and 19 are part of the acknowledgement. Verse 21, excuse me. So from that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples, here it is, how that he must go into Jerusalem, suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised again the third day. There's the second stage, the approach of the cross. Jesus must come, Jesus must die and come back to life. But it doesn't stop there. We come to the next set of verses, verse 24 down through verse 28. We talked about this, denying yourself, picking up your cross. Now, look at verse 27. For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he shall reward every man according to his works. Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. There's the third stage of Jesus' ministry. What is it? The appearing of his coming. Has verse 27 and verse 28 happened yet? No. Jesus has not come yet. Okay? But there is a partial fulfillment of verse 28. When he says this, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. That's what the Transfiguration is all about. We saw that in Mark, how the Transfiguration is a fulfillment of the coming and glory of Jesus in that statement. Now, we know that it's not a full fulfillment because Jesus has not come back already, right? We know that. We're still here. No one's received rewards. We're still going on. Now, okay. I'm going to ask you a question. I know we're not thinking like Jews, right? We're not Jewish people. So we're not thinking the same way that these disciples would have been thinking. Do you remember the story of Moses? God comes to Moses at the burning bush. Moses, I want you to go and set my people free. Moses is like, I can't do that. You're going to go anyway. Well, I'm going to go, so who do I tell them? Well, you tell them my name. And this is my name, I am that I am. Okay, it's pretty powerful. So he goes to this stage, and then Moses comes to the point, he's like, okay, well, how can I convince them? What can I do to show them that you have truly sent me? And then he says, well, you have that rod in your hand. He says, yes. He says, throw the rod down, and the rod turns into a serpent. And Moses jumps back, and he's afraid of it, and God says, pick it up. It'll turn back to a staff. He picks it up, and it turns back to the rod. He says, Moses, I have another example, another miracle that you can do. I want you to put your hand, stick it inside your mantle, your cloak, and then pull it out. So Moses does that, and when he does, his hand is completely white. He has leprosy in his hand. Of course, Moses is like freaking out. Oh, I have leprosy. And then God says, stick it back in. And he puts his hand back in, and he pulls it back out, and the leprosy is healed. He says, I have one more miracle that you can do. Take the water. He had like a canteen or whatever, water. Pour some water out. And as he pours out, the water that comes out of the canteen turns to blood right there. So he goes to Pharaoh. He shows that he does these miracles, and Israel's like, yay, we're going to be rescued. We're going to follow you. Let's do this thing, right? Okay. But hold on. Okay, this is the point. What was Moses saying? That's great, God, you're saying all this stuff. So clapping, yay, Lord. Prove it. Confirm it. They're not going to believe me. And honestly, I'm talking to a bush that's burning and it's on fire, but I don't even know if I believe this or not. So this is the point in Matthew. It's also the point of Mark, but this is the point of Matthew. What is Matthew's point? Matthew's point is to answer the disciples' question. We don't read it, but the disciples may have asked, okay, how do we know? We believe that you're the Messiah, but how do we know? So what we have in all of this, we have the context of the Transfiguration. And what is Matthew's context of the Transfiguration? That Christ has come. Christ said he's going to be crucified, and Christ is going to come back. Okay, he's writing to people living in the first century. We're looking back over history. They are not. So when somebody reads Matthew's gospel about this man named Jesus, they're reading this. Jesus has come. Jesus was crucified. He came back to life. He's going to come back. Well, how do we know? So what Matthew does is Matthew gives us the confirmation through the transfiguration. What happens is Jesus is telling all of his disciples this stuff, and then he takes Peter, James, and John to a mountain, and he's going to do this. I'm going to prove to you that everything that I have just said is going to happen. You're going to see it. Now, they don't know it yet, but that's what's about to happen. Now, so what we have in verse 2 down through verse number 8 and really into verse 13, but especially verses 1 through 8, is we have a confirmation to these disciples and to the men and women reading what Matthew wrote and the message that was being declared to them that it is true. Now, you say, well, nobody else was there but Peter, James, and John. Yes. But Peter, James, and John, to the Jewish people, all they needed was 2 to 3 witnesses. They've got 3 witnesses right here. Very important. Now, although the gospel writers include all of these details, their emphasis is different. Matthew is confirming who the Lord is by this transfiguration. And he's going to use the events of the transfiguration to prove Jesus really is who he claimed to be. And how does he do it? The first way that Matthew uses this transfiguration to confirm who Jesus is through the vision itself. Now let's look at this. Verses 1 through 3. Here's the vision. And after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John his brother, and bringeth them up into an high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias talking with them. Now, this entire scene would be very relevant to these disciples. They're having a vision. Notice the people. There's 4 thoughts about this. The people that he takes. He takes Peter, James, and John. Now, he doesn't take any of the other apostles. He doesn't take the other disciples. Only these 3. Now, I believe the reason he takes these 3 is because these 3 men have developed to a place in their life to receive it. Jesus has kept saying over and over again, those who have, I'm going to give more to them. And those who don't have, what they do have, I'm going to take away. And so the point is as they develop, they're going to get more and more understanding of who Jesus is. So I believe Peter, James, and John are receiving this special revelation and vision because they have developed. But it even goes even a little bit deeper than that when you look at it from Old Testament. God, even in the Old Testament, God showed Moses those wonderful miracles. Aaron was a part of it, but Aaron didn't see it. Moses did. Some of the other miracles, the visions that Daniel had, and the visions that Ezekiel had, and the visions that Jeremiah had and Isaiah had, they wrote down what they saw, but no one else was participating in that. And so the point is that because this vision was only given to a select few, it makes the vision have more weight and more seriousness to this vision. And so the people that God showed it to, Peter, James, and John, who later become strong men in the early church, but they've developed. Notice the place, to a high mountain. Now, I don't want to overemphasize this, but I don't want to de-emphasize this either. This mountain is special. Now, whether it's Mount Hermon or not, I believe that it is. But even if it's not, this mountain is very high, and it's a place of solitude. Now, and again, why is the mountain? It is symbolic to the Jewish people. Where did God give the law to Moses? On Mount Sinai. Where did God burning bush on a mountain? Where did, even though it's not Old Testament per se, Jesus was tempted there in the wilderness and up in the mountains. David made reference to the mountains being important to Israel. The Old Testament describes God as dwelling in the mountaintops and being in the mountains surrounding Israel. Okay, So to the Jewish people, the fact that this vision, it was only to a certain group, and the vision that they're having is happening in a mountain. It's all very, not just symbolic in the sense of it didn't happen, but it would speak to Jewish people. Notice the process. Now, this is important as well. In verse number 2, so he takes them to a mountain, and he was transfigured before them. And now, he was transfigured. Now, that's important. Yes, okay. But what, Matthew, and what do you mean he was transfigured before them? Did his nose change shape? Did his head get big? Did he get big eyes? And did he turn into a giant? No. He explains what he means, okay? And his face did shine as the sun. That's bright. And his raiment was white as the light. And so Matthew describes for us the transfiguration. His face changed. It didn't change shape, but it glowed. And it was bright like the sun. Now, so what does this imply? They wouldn't be able, they would have a hard time looking. They recognized him. Lord, it's good for us to be here. They recognize it as Jesus, him as Jesus. But at the same time, it's bright. They're looking at it. They're having to close and squint. But then his clothes are shining. Now you say, well, brother, what's the big deal about this? This scene takes us. This right here would take the Jewish reader, Matthew or James and John and Peter, straight back to Ezekiel, straight back to Daniel, and the visions that they had of creatures that look like this. And what creatures look like this? Angelic beings. Beings that are not of this world. Spirit beings. They, in the Old Testament, Daniel and Ezekiel, they saw, I see a man that he has the form of a man, and his face is shining, and his clothes are bright, and it's terrifying to me. Okay, so this transfiguration, I won't mention it again, but this entire scene is very majestic. It's very grand, but it goes beyond that. It's glorious. We're seeing an angel. I mean, this would have been their reaction. Jesus doesn't look the same. He's different. This is odd. So the Lord is recognizable, but he looks like an angel from the Old Testament. Notice the participants of this vision. In verse number 3, and behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias talking with him. This is also extremely important. Now, these are the two most famous, I would say the most famous of men to the Israelites. Moses and Elijah. Moses is the great deliverer. Elijah is the great prophet. Okay? He's the one that prayed for no rain. He's the one who prayed fire down from heaven. I mean, two of the most important and prominent men of the Old Testament. These men represent God's word. We talked about that last week, okay? Moses represents the law of God. He gave God's law to the people. When people think about Moses in the New Testament and the Jewish people, they thought law of God, 10 commandments, sacrifices, tabernacle, okay? Elijah represents all of the prophets of God. And so in Matthew's gospel, the reason this is important is that the relationship of Jesus, the Son of Man, the Christ, the Son of the living God, with Moses and Elijah, this Jesus standing with Moses and Elijah would be extremely important in confirming to the apostles that Jesus really is the Son of God, the King of Israel. For Moses and Elijah to be talking to them or talking to him, this is a big deal to Israel. And when these men would have seen these men, they either recognized, they heard Jesus call him Moses and Elijah, How they knew, we don't know. But they recognized them as Moses and Elijah. Peter says Moses and Elijah, and these men are standing before them. What's the entire point of verses 1 through 3 is this vision is confirming, it's the stamp of approval. It's the miracles of Moses. It's his hand turning to leprosy. It's the staff falling on the ground turning into a serpent. It's confirming everything that Jesus has said. It's confirming everything that Peter, James, and John are believing, that Jesus is the Christ. But Brother Dan, they've got all of the miracles. They already believe? They did already believe. They did already believe. And we're going to get here to the end and look at it next week. Don't tell anybody this until I've resurrected from the dead. Okay. So in the Gospels, and we have to keep this in mind, Jesus is building in their life. So every little thing adds on to what they already know. And so this is confirming, up to this point, everything they've already been taught. We keep reading and we know that these men still are struggling with a lot of these things. They are. It's not until after the resurrection and Jesus speaks to them that it all starts to fall into place, 1, 2, 3. But this vision of the Transfiguration is confirming it, but it doesn't stop there. Matthew doesn't stop. Notice the third thing that confirms who Jesus is, and that's the voice for the Lord. Now look at verse 4 and 5. So they see Moses and Elijah. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah or Elias. Now, the vision confirms it. Jesus is who he says he is, but it doesn't stop. There's a few things that God is still showing these men. Now, the next sign of confirmation is the voice that they hear from the cloud and they hear from heaven. Now, Peter is not asking to build 3 altars, but to build 3 tabernacles or 3 tents. Now, as we read the Gospel of Mark, or as we read in the Gospel of Mark, Peter said this because he wasn't sure what he should say. Like man, this is great. Let's build 3 tents right here. Now, we're not sure the reason or motivation of Peter. Maybe, and honestly, maybe it's at night. And he's thinking, hey, let's keep this going. I mean, let's throw up 3 pup tents right here and be like the Boy Scouts, and let's just sleep outside tonight. And y'all have this, keep the conversation going. Okay, we're not exactly sure. But he wanted to build 3 tents and 3 tabernacles. Okay, now, but what does happen next is very important to these men, and it is very important in what Matthew is revealing to us. Okay, so the voice is going to confirm, again, to these men, Jesus, he's who he says he is. There's 2 things that happen. In verse number 5, the first thing is that there is the authentication of the Lord. In other words, God is authenticating the Father. God himself, the Father, is going to put his stamp on Jesus' head, as it were. So verse 4, Peter, let's build 3 tabernacles, right? Verse 5, while he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. Now, what do these men see? There's Peter, there's the Lord, and there's Elijah and Moses. Lord, this is great. We ought to build some tents. Let's just camp out here for the rest of the night. Now, but what do these men see? What happens next? So they see a cloud and they hear a voice. Now this is very important to the Jewish people. Okay, so if we're standing outside and we're just talking and having a good time, and we look up at the sky and we see a little dot, and it starts moving around, doing all sorts of crazy stuff. We're like, aliens or what's going on? And we said that, and all of a sudden, there's fog all around us. And we hear a roaring sound. Okay, we're going to be like, what's going on? This is nuts. It's going to freak us out. So, yeah, see you, bye. Okay, if this is at night, if it's at night, or maybe early, we don't know, but I think it's dark enough that Jesus shining is a big deal. Or it may have been in the day, and the fact that Jesus is shining is a big deal because it's brighter than the sun, maybe. Okay, we don't know the time of the day. But all of a sudden, a cloud is hanging over them. It may even be surrounding them, but at least it's overshadowing them, it's covering over them. And then they hear a voice. They don't hear a roar. They don't hear thunder. They hear a voice that very clearly says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Hear him." Well, what do? They heard it, they fell on their face, and they were so afraid. All right, so let's get the picture. We're outside. It gets cloudy. I mean, within just a second, and we hear something that sounds like a groan, a moan, a voice, or something. Yeah, okay, I'm done. I'm out. See you later. Yeah. Okay. Now, so that's where we are. Okay. Now, let's go back in our minds. We got Peter. We've got James. We've got John. They know the Old Testament. We've got Moses. We've got Elijah. They're standing here talking. Why did God come down in a cloud? And why is it so significant that he speaks? Now, in the Old Testament, let me rephrase it. There is a word that the Jewish people use, and the word the rabbis would use in the Old Testament times, and in here, it's not in the New Testament, it's not mentioned in our Bibles, but the word is Shekinah. Okay, and it means to dwell in, or the place to dwell, or the dwelling of, and it represents the Shekinah glory, or the dwelling of God's glory. Now, in the Old Testament, whenever God would manifest himself to his people, especially in a large number of people, he would always come down in a cloud. Remember in Exodus 12 and 13, God leads the people out of Egypt. They're following Moses. And remember what Moses says in Exodus, that there was a pillar of cloud that led the people in the day, in a pillar of fire by night. So how did God manifest himself? It was in a pillar of a cloud. And then remember when they built the tabernacle and they put the Ark of the Covenant in, the Old Testament says that a pillar of a cloud was over the tabernacle, reaching up into heaven. Okay, and then in the same thing in the temple. So whenever God appeared to his people, he always appeared in a cloud. Okay, and then when he would appear in a cloud, he would speak. He appeared to Moses in a cloud, and he spoke. And so what was the point? So what, to the Jewish person, Jesus is transfigured in front of these three men. So they're seeing this vision. Okay, yeah, Jesus is somebody different for sure. This is great. Now, Peter failed, and this is where Peter's failure was, and this is why God is coming to the cloud, and he's giving this authentication. Peter he saw the Lord, but what did he say? It's good that we're here. Let's build Moses and Elijah tabernacle. Well, that wasn't the point. The point was to see Jesus, right? But he's okay. Again, he didn't know what to say. And so this is why God speaks. This is my Son whom will please. Hear him. Now, so this cloud coming down and this voice speaking, what is it showing to these men? Whatever this voice says, whatever's connected, man, we better listen. He's authenticating everything that Jesus has said. But not only that, but he's also affirming it. It's one thing to authenticate something. In other words, saying it's genuine, saying this is this is the one. But now he is affirming. What does the voice they hear declare? The voice they hear declares, "This is my son, and I'm well pleased with him." Okay. Yeah. Oh, wow. This is your son. Oh, righty. This is God. They know that it's God because no one does this. Nowhere else in Scripture do we have somebody appearing in a cloud and speaking, "This is God the Father." This is God speaking, and this is God saying, "This is my son," and we need to hear him. Now, I mentioned this last week. He's not telling them to ignore Moses and Elijah. That's not the point at all. Okay? But that everything that Moses and Elijah are about, it's about Jesus. Okay, that's the point. He's affirming. The apostles at this time may have been tempted to only listen to Moses and Elijah. And they may have been tempted to listen to Moses and Elijah over the Lord. But the point that God is wanting to make to these men is, you need to listen to my son. I am well pleased with him. He has just told you he's going to die and he's going to come back to life. You need to listen to him. He's already told you that he is the king and that he is coming to reward his servants. You need to listen to him. You are seeing his kingdom before you. You are seeing his glory and his power before you. You need to listen to him. And so the vision of this transfiguration, the vision is confirming. This voice also confirms who Jesus is. But then we come to verse 6 through 8, and this is very interesting. They don't mention this. Mark and Luke don't mention this, only Matthew. Why? Because what the Lord does, the third thing is this, it verifies. There's the verification from the Lord himself. Now, Matthew is the only one that mentions this, and I believe this is very important. And I believe that there's a bit of a connection with what they see to the visions that Daniel has. Now, Daniel had a vision that startled him, and the angel of the Lord would touch him. Now, the touch from the angel represented a connection between the prophet and between the vision. Now, so what is it? It symbolizes this, that what Daniel had seen was more than a dream. It was more than some experience. Now, I want you to turn back to Daniel 10. I want you to see this in Daniel 10 very quickly. I don't really want to take a lot of time with this, but I want you to see, because this is the same thing that we see Jesus doing with his disciples. And Jesus doing this with his disciples, and I know I keep making reference to this connection, but these men, Peter, James, and John, at the exact moment that it was happening, may not have made the connection. Okay? They made the connection through the vision. Okay, yep, Jesus transfigured, his face is shining, and his clothes are shining. Yeah, this is different. This is different. He turned the water to wine. That was a big deal. He walked on water. That is a big, big deal. He fed 5,000 people, more than 5,000 people, with 5 pieces of bread and 2 small fishes. Wow, that is a miracle, but now he glows. And there is a cloud around me, and a voice is speaking to me. Yeah, buddy. All righty. I have entered it now. Okay. Now, they would have been awestruck by it. They're not sitting down saying, "Oh, where's the connection in the Old Testament?" No, they're not doing it then. But later on, Matthew is writing this so that his readers will make the connection. So look at Daniel 10. Now, who Daniel sees here is an angel. This is not Jesus. It is an angel, but notice the similarities here. Daniel 10 and verse 5. Then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man, notice that, a man, clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning. In other words, his face is bright, it's shining, it's glowing, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and feet like in color of polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. I'm sorry, this actually I said this is an angel. This may be a vision of the Lord Himself. Okay, and I, Daniel, also alone saw the vision. For the men that were with me saw not the vision, but a great quaking fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. So a few minutes ago, said, "Yep, see ya, I'm out." Yeah, the earth started shaking and quaking, which was unusual for this place. And it's obvious because these men are like, "Yep, I'm out. I'm hiding. This is crazy. Something's not good." And all of a sudden there's a vision. Okay, verse number 10, or verse number 9. Yet heard I the voice of his words, and when I heard the voice of his words, then was I in a deep sleep on my face, and my face toward the ground. So Daniel hears this voice, and he falls asleep. He's like, he passes out, he falls asleep. And behold, an hand touched me. There he is, he touched him, which set me upon my knees and upon the palms of my hands. So he's like a dog, right? He's on his hands and knees. And he said unto me, O Daniel, a man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright, for unto thee am I now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling. Then said he unto me, Fear not, Daniel. From the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. Now notice the similarities here. What does Daniel see? He sees a man whose face is shining and his clothes are bright. He is so startled by this that he falls to the ground when he hears his voice. But then notice the similarities. What does this man do? It may be Jesus, or as we read it, it seems to be more an angel, Gabriel, or the Prince of Israel, maybe even Michael the archangel, comes and touches Daniel and says, Daniel, don't be afraid. Now we can turn back to Matthew 10. Now the reason I wanted you to read, Matthew 17. The reason I wanted you to see that is notice in verse number 6, the terror. And when the disciples heard it, what did? They fell on their face and were so afraid. The same thing Daniel did. He fell to the ground. Here they're afraid. Notice the touch. And Jesus came and touched them. Notice again the connection. The Lord is touching them. This is very similar to what we see in the book of Daniel. This touch is about connection. Jesus is connected with what they saw and what they heard. This is so that these men understand they're not just in like a trance. They didn't just have bad fish, right? They didn't sleep on a rock wrong and have a bad dream. All three of them are experiencing the same thing, and all three of them are afraid, and all. So I really honestly think if we're standing outside, it gets dark, and there's clouds, and we hear a voice, and we see all of these things, one person might be like, "Whoa, I'm out." Another person might say, "I'm going to say, I don't know," and the other person might say, "I'm not afraid of nothing, bring." You may get a different response. Well, if one person is like, "No, let's stick together," there's more of an opportunity that everybody may stick together. There's strength in numbers, right? So my point is that there's strength here, and yet they all do the same thing. They fall down. So we see there's terror, but then there's this touch. And so Jesus, like the angel in Daniel, walks over and touches the prophet that has this vision, letting him know, Daniel, this is real. You're asleep, Daniel, but this is very real. I want you to wake up. I want you to sit up. I have something to share with you. Here, these men, they fall down. They're terrified. And immediately what does Christ say to them? Arise and be not afraid, just like the angel said to Daniel. Notice his talk. He speaks to these men. Again, what is the connection for you and me and for the Jewish readers? Daniel has a vision of the Son of Man later on in Daniel. Daniel has a very similar vision. The point of the vision is to reveal something to Daniel, but the point of the vision was to confirm to Daniel what he had already seen. And you read Daniel 10, that's exactly what's happening. The angel is bringing a message to Daniel to confirm what Daniel had already seen. So here in Matthew 17, in this transfiguration, Matthew is confirming to us as the disciples are being confirmed. Through the vision, Jesus is who he claims to be. Through the voice, there's a cloud and they hear a voice. The Father is authenticating and affirming who Jesus is. And then Jesus himself is verifying that this is all very real. You're scared. That's real. I'm speaking to you. That's real. And I'm touching you. That's real. And so when he reaches over and he touches them, he is verifying what you've just experienced, gentlemen, is very real. I am who I claim to be. I am, Peter, who you believe I am. I am the Son of Man. I am the Christ. I am the Son of God. And then he tells them in verse 8, and verse number 9, as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying, tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. We'll talk about that in the weeks to come in connection to everything else. And there's differences of opinion, but what would the resurrection do? The resurrection would confirm this. It would confirm this transfiguration even more. It would confirm when Peter, James, and John tell the story of how Jesus was transfigured in front of them. And we know they told the story because Peter told it to Mark, and then Peter writes about it in 2 Peter. Here Matthew is writing about it, and we know they told the story because Luke was gathering all of his information from anybody and everybody that knew about Jesus, and Luke tells us about it. So we know they told, and we know people believed it. And what confirmed even this? The fact that Jesus really did die, and he came back to life, and he rose from the dead. And so all of these things are confirming. Now you say, Brother Dan, I know this. I was raised in church, or I know this. I don't doubt, or I don't, disbelieve. And no, we should. I mean, we know it. We've been taught it. But what I want you to see, though, is how wonderful, man, this is. This is God teaching these men, showing these men, and showing the readers of Matthew in the first century, and showing you and me 2,000 years later in the 21st century who Jesus is. He really is who he claimed to be. These three men were there, and they saw it. Their fear was real. The touch was real. Your eyes can play tricks on you. Yes. But notice what is happening. It's not just their eyes. It's their emotions. It's fear. It's their ears. Not only did their eyes see, but their ears heard. Their flesh felt. All of these, every sense, except for smelling and tasting, are involved. And yeah, these men. This is very powerful. And so I hope that you understand from Matthew, why this transfiguration is so important. I mean, he's fulfilling, some of you are going to see the kingdom. And they just saw it. And it's confirming everything that Jesus said. So what a wonderful thing that we have right here. Amen. We'll have services on Sunday morning. And thank you all for coming tonight. We'll have a prayer, a quick little prayer. And I pray that the Lord will richly bless you. I hope that you learned something from the lesson tonight. Amen.